Picture this. You're floating in the absolute silence of deep space, staring out a tiny window, and you suddenly realize you aren't alone. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing a cold, calculating forensic audit of the newly released May 2026 Pursuit archive documents. We're looking at this really fascinating intersection of aerospace history and physics. Specifically, we're digging into a newly declassified anomaly from the 1972 Apollo 17 mission and looking at how the source documents use fundamental orbital mechanics to completely challenge the established narrative. It's a wild ride, so let's get into it because the math on this one is incredibly revealing.
Let's jump right into the unredacted transcripts from the Apollo 17 mission back in December 1972. Astronauts Eugene Cernan, Harrison Schmitt, and Ronald Evans were in deep lunar orbit when they reported something that, honestly, completely defied logic. And they didn't just report seeing some optical illusion. The transcripts explicitly document the crew visually confirming 3 dots in a triangular formation and jagged angular fragments that are tumbling directly outside their command module. This exact observation is the foundation that sets up our entire investigation today.
So where's this coming from now? Well, this revelation comes directly from the Department of War's recent Pursuit release. That stands for the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters. Back in May 2026, over 4,000 pages of previously classified or heavily redacted documents were just dumped into the public domain. And it's this massive release that finally brought the unredacted 1972 communications of those astronauts into the clear, giving civilian researchers the raw data to actually analyze.
Just look at this timeline. We're talking about a massive, multi-decade gap between the actual event in December 1972 and these unprecedented declassifications in May 2026. For over 50 years, the specifics of what those astronauts saw tumbling outside their window were totally shielded from rigorous public scientific scrutiny. But now that the data's finally out, we can test the official explanation against the actual laws of physics.
Section 1. The official cover story, or as it's outlined here, NASA's frozen wastewater alibi.
Okay, so here's the official narrative. NASA says the astronauts were just observing mundane spacecraft debris. The explanation states that pieces of frozen wastewater, and yes, we are essentially talking about frozen astronaut urine and condensation, along with pieces of mylar thermal insulation, naturally flaked off the hull of the spacecraft. This was reportedly caused by the extreme thermal variance, the intense shift between heat and cold in the lunar vacuum. So basically, the official story is that the greatest mystery in lunar orbit was just a bathroom leak.
But the source text we're analyzing fiercely pushes back on this. They call this a limited hangout. If you aren't familiar, that's an intelligence tactic where you admit to a small, maybe slightly embarrassing truth like freezing urine flakes just to distract the public from a massive mathematical impossibility. And that mathematical impossibility is where this explainer gets really fascinating.
Section 2. The kinematic physics problem. Let's apply some orbital mechanics to the lunar vacuum.
To really grasp the scale of the indictment presented in these source documents, you gotta keep this number in your head: 3,600 miles per hour. The Apollo 17 command module wasn't just casually floating along. It was screaming through the vacuum of space at over 3,600 miles per hour. That is roughly 5 times the speed of sound at sea level. So whatever is right outside that window has to account for that unbelievable velocity.
And here's where the physics comes in. The source mathematically argues that in a frictionless vacuum, you literally cannot cheat physics. There's zero air resistance up there. To stay right next to a capsule moving that fast, an object has to be traveling at the exact same orbital velocity. And the velocity required to maintain an orbit is strictly dictated by gravity and the radius of the orbit. It's pure, inescapable math.
Which brings us to the core conflict, staring right at Newton's first law of motion. Without atmospheric friction, debris is going to behave in a highly predictable linear way. If a piece of mylar or some ice flakes off the hull, it doesn't get caught in a slipstream because, well, there's no air to create a slipstream. It simply continues on its own unpowered, straight-line trajectory based on the exact force that pushed it off the ship.
Let's walk through this sequence of events here to really visualize this. 1. The spacecraft is moving at thousands of miles per hour. 2. Some debris detaches. 3. With no air friction, it immediately follows an unpowered, straight-line path. Which means, step 4, that debris cannot arbitrarily tumble, suddenly change direction, or mysteriously maintain localized, synchronized proximity to a vehicle going 3,600 miles per hour. It would just drift away. Period. So the forensic audit concludes it is physically impossible for unpowered space junk to act the way the astronauts described. You just can't break Newton's laws. If these things are matching speed, tumbling, and holding a tight, triangular formation, well, what does that mean? It means they're flying themselves. To pull off those maneuvers right outside a module moving that fast, an object absolutely must possess its own independent, powered kinematic thrust.
Section 3. The Lunar Sentinel Hypothesis and the verdict of this scientific indictment.
We are looking at a pretty stark contrast here. On one side, you have NASA's narrative, simple, drifting flakes of frozen waste and insulation. But on the other side, you have the source document's rigorous mathematical indictment, stating that these objects had to be autonomous, radar-absorbing sentinels exhibiting their own powered kinematic thrust. It's essentially a clash between a mundane cover story and the cold, hard data of orbital mechanics.
And the text takes this mathematical conclusion to an incredible place. It asserts that because these objects required powered thrust, the Apollo 17 astronauts were actually visually confirming an advanced non-human patrol fleet. The author claims they were observing sentinels that were actively maintaining operational infrastructure, specifically referring to a hollow lunar broadcast tower in deep lunar orbit. Now that is a massive leap in implications, but it's a leap the author insists is demanded by the physics.
By dumping these documents into the public domain in May 2026, the Pursuit Protocol inadvertently handed civilian researchers the exact mathematical data needed to challenge these decades-old space narratives. They gave us the unredacted transcripts, researchers applied standard astrophysics to them, and boom, we have a completely new perspective on what might have happened during our final mission to the Moon.
So, we've walked through the transcripts, the official alibi, and the absolutely unforgiving math of orbital velocity. And it leaves us with this. If basic physics proves these tumbling, synchronized objects couldn't possibly be unpowered space junk, what exactly were Eugene Cernan and his crew watching in the dead of the lunar sky? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me to look at the data today on This Explainer. Keep questioning the narrative.